Hi, Jane here. Thanks for joining me. I'm a huge fan of empowering you, as are the speakers in our Go Big series. Have you stopped to think recently what you really want in your life? Do you feel like you were meant for more, as I had for so many years? What's the big goal that you want to achieve this coming year, or a fear that you finally want to get over? If you're ready to re-envision your future and launch your big idea, maybe spread your influence or get over a fear finally, then I invite you to join me and some of our speakers. We want to help you empower your mindset, build your vision, and own your dream. Stop needing to be right and let's do this now, together. Go to janeapplegath.com, click on Go Big Sign Up, and I will see you there. Sending you much love and success. Have an incredibly epic day. Hope to see you soon. Hi everyone, I'm Jane Applegath. Welcome to the Epic Vision Zone, where some of the world's most successful self-made women and men share their multi-million-dollar ideas, their high-performance habits, visionary mindsets, and resources so you can hit the go button on your epic life. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Amanda Hainline has been a revered emotional freedom mentor for the past 15 years, working with clients around the globe. She is an intuitive healer, clairvoyant, audiovoyant, medium, channel, author, and more. Her passion is bringing energy healing to others through teaching, hands-on healing, and distance work. A former business manager and consultant, Amanda did not intentionally pursue a spiritual life. It was in her 30s, suffering from depression and struggling to carry the load of motherhood, that she sought the aid of an energy healer. Her initial session reduced her anxiety, but it was the second session that changed her life forever. She went from a suburban mom to a full-blown psychic in 30 seconds. Today, Amanda is an emotional freedom mentor and an intuitive healer, as well as the author of her book called Feel Better in 5 Minutes, an empowering guide to gain control over your emotions. In Feel Better in 5 Minutes, she shares 79 emotional freedom methods to help others gain freedom from their anxiety, depression, and stress that are rampant in today's climate. Welcome, Amanda. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I just want to dive right in because you have one of the most amazing stories I have ever heard. You had a life-changing experience that I would love for you to share with our audience, and tell us how that led you to authoring your book, Feel Better in 5 Minutes, which, by the way, I love the title.
Thank you. My experience started, like you said, it was about 15, 16 years ago now, that I was a mom of 2 young kids. And at the time I was feeling kind of like I was stuck in a Groundhog Day. Every day was the same. I wasn't moving forward in my life. I was depressed, had a lot of anxiety. I was in a tough marriage. And I just needed something to change. I needed something different. And a friend recommended that I go to an energy healer. And I didn't know what that was, but I thought it's worth a shot. You know, I don't really understand what they do or how they do it, but I thought I will try anything. I didn't really want to do medication. I'd seen people in my family struggle with that on and off for years, and I just didn't want to go down that path for myself. So I went to this healer, and after the first session, I did feel much better. I felt like my anxiety was relieved. I was laughing, I was smiling, which is something I hadn't done in a long time. And so I thought, well, if one session is good, two must be better. And so I went back, and at the second session, the healer started talking to me, and she said, all of your chakras want to open at once. And I didn't know what a chakra was at the time, but it's basically the premise of energy centers that run down the middle of your body that metabolize energy from the environment around you. And when she started tapping on my head and my heart, I felt this panic wash over me. You know, I was in this office by myself with just her, and it was quiet. It was at night. But all of a sudden, I felt this terror wash over me, and I started screaming, and my body just tensed up, and uncontrollable spasm, and I started sweating and feeling like I was burning from the inside out. And that lasted for about 30 seconds. And afterwards, I felt like I'd been hit on the head really hard. I was very disoriented. And I said, what happened? And she said, all of your chakras opened at once. And I thought, well, that really doesn't tell me anything. But she said, go outside, walk around, get in your car, go home, go to bed. I said, I will do that. So I did that and thought I would feel better the next morning, but I didn't. I felt worse. Couldn't stop crying, felt very, very heavy, just more depressed than ever. And I thought, well, that didn't help. Like the first session had, I was really confused. And so I took my kids to school, came home, went to bed, and slept until they were ready to come home from school. I went and got them. And I had a really intense experience as I was walking into the school to retrieve them. I started feeling everyone's emotions around me. And I started hearing their thoughts and experiencing flashes of things that had happened to them or things that were going on in their life, as well as all of the activity that was going on around me. You know, you can imagine children running out of a school and screaming and playing and everything. And so it was a lot to deal with because I didn't know what was happening. And I thought I must be going crazy. And I retrieved them. I came home. I was very upset. I went back into the office the next day, and the woman said, well, your chakras are going to balance and close and then go back to normal. And it didn't. Things got more intense. I started hearing more voices. At first, it was just a word here and there. But one of the healers instructed me to keep a tablet in my kitchen and just start writing things down because she said, you are a channel, which scared me at first because anytime I'd ever seen anyone in a movie be a medium or a channel, it didn't end well for them. You know, it's not something that I was planning on doing. But I followed her instruction and I did that. And then I started experiencing PTSD episodes from all the traumas I'd experienced as a child that would come on with no warning. I could be driving and I would start having one and I would have to hold everything until I got home and then just cry and scream and whatever I needed to do to get it out, you know, as well as experiencing all of these forces around me that I couldn't see physically with my own eyes that were either attacking me or trying to talk to me and get me to do things. And it was just very, very intense. And for 6 months, I really thought I was going crazy. I thought I was going to have to be committed to a mental institution somewhere. And so that was a very difficult time. And at the end of that 6 months, I was thinking I had things together. I could, you know, be around people, come home, take out the extra energy I'd picked up from them. Because basically what happened is I had no energetic immune system. So anytime I was around any kind of negative emotions or anything, I would pick those up and I would start feeling those extremely heavily. And so I had to learn how to clear all of those things from myself and from my energy system because it would heavily affect my psyche and how I was functioning throughout the day. And so about 6 months after that, I had 3 angels show up in my living room just about the time I thought I had things together. And they said, we're going to teach you how to heal people. And I just laughed at them. And I was like, I can't even heal myself. You know, have you seen my life? I think you're at the wrong house. Dial a different number. But they were insistent and they started teaching me how to work with energy and how to do hands-on healing first on my family. And then people started showing up in my life that needed help. So I started working with them and just began a practice.
Wow, that's amazing. like I said, we chatted just briefly beforehand, and I said to Amanda, I said, "You must have felt like you'd lost your mind,
Yes.
especially since you weren't aware of the force of energy or the chakras or anything of that nature, and then to be feeling and sensing other people's emotions. I mean, oh my Lord. I mean, it's enough that we sense our own, not to
Right.
take on others as well. Wow, that
Exactly.
is amazing. Certainly something right out of the fiction. And if you didn't know, if you weren't living proof here today, people would think, oh yeah, that's just fiction. But anyway,
Right.
amazing story. Well, now that you've shifted into this new world and this gift that you have, I my next question is, in your book you say that our emotions are something that we experience. They're not who we are, which is very profound. I also believe that. But when we're in the depth of those emotions, we feel we identify with that. What does it mean to shift our fundamental emotional state? And how can it help us relieve stress, anxiety, and sadness?
Well, to shift your fundamental emotional state is really key to just overall happiness and health. So, the way I address it in the book is I really look at everything from an energetic perspective instead of just a psychological perspective, because in my experience, everything starts as energy. So, when you're talking about emotional states, we're really kind of talking about the middle of the sandwich, is what I call it. So, the initial state that things start in is energetic, which is the spiritual state. If you're saying body, mind, spirit, it really starts in this emotional place. But people don't walk around saying, my chakra hurts or my aura is heavy today. That's just not what people say. What they say is, I feel anxiety, I feel depression, or I am depressed is more along the lines of what people tend to say. So whenever you start in an energetic place, whenever you start from a place of where before the emotion began, you have this energetic disturbance that occurs, and that becomes an emotional disturbance. So if you start with the energetic space and you start releasing the energy from that space that's creating those emotions to begin with, it really helps to alleviate the emotional state that is causing so much distress.
So you're saying to be more aware of the energy first that it's creating? Is that
Right.
okay?
Right. But it's one of those things that people are aware of their emotions first. That's where they really notice it. So when you have your emotions causing you distress, when you feel depressed, when you feel anxiety or anger, um, we want to start with the emotion and addressing that, which is not incorrect. But when you start to address it from an energetic perspective and starting to release the emotions and calling them forth and having an awareness for them, and then using energetic techniques to release them, it's just a different way of addressing the problem rather than approaching it solely psychologically.
Right. Yes, that makes total sense because I do believe that emotions are energy in motion. And
Right,
so,
exactly.
yeah. And so when you know that and you believe that, which it definitely is, uh, we want to address the energy, whether it's heavy, whether it's light, whether it's, anxiety, which, yes, absolutely, I can see that. So, signs of buried emotions. What are some signs that people are struggling with buried emotions?
Buried emotions are interesting because when you have buried emotions, what happens is we tend to, a lot of times, not even aware that we have them in there. We tend to take them on as our personality. We say, I am depressed. I am anxious. I am angry. And when we use that term I am, what we're saying is that's who we are. And we don't really think about it that way, but subconsciously what we're doing is energetically and psychologically wrapping that emotion around and kind of embedding it in our identity. And when we do that, what our subconscious does is it really says, okay, well, I can't release that state of emotion because it's who I am as a person, it's my identity, and I can't let go of who I am. And so, what I teach people fundamentally is that they're not their emotions. And emotion is something that you experience, it's not a state of being. So, what I teach people to do is separate that thought process and say, when you catch yourself saying, I am depressed, which we all do that, we all say, I am something, or I am sick. That's another one that people really start to embed that in their identity. And so it makes it hard to get well a lot of times from physical issues. So that's just coupled on the emotional issues that people have. But I teach them to say, I am experiencing anxiety, or I am experiencing depression, versus I am this. And when you start to hold emotions as separate from who you are as a person, your subconscious starts to separate that. And so then you can start to go about releasing those emotional states because you recognize that as being separate from what your identity is.
I love that. That is so powerful, Amanda. Oh, I do understand that when people say I am, you are completely identifying with whatever it is that I am happy, I am sad, I am sick. But wording it so saying I am experiencing this, that is, wow, that is a great takeaway. Everybody should remember that. Thank you so much. And you're right, because then you start to shift your thinking, you start to shift your subconscious, and that's the key. So beautiful. I love that. I'm going to remember that for sure and share it with all my friends and family.
It's very helpful. I even fall into that trap. Sometimes I catch myself saying, I'm like, no, I am experiencing this, and it's
Yeah.
tricky. It's just habit. It's a habit change.
It's a habit change, but it's a great habit change. Oh my gosh, we all need to do that. That should be in the book of successful habits or whatever, definitely. So, how to stop overwhelm. Women can often experience overwhelm more than men, and especially in the last year and a half with everything we've had to deal with. So, give us a few tips how to stop overwhelm, because I'm sure that's something that everyone could use today.
It's a big one. Women tend to get overwhelmed a lot because of the way they think. So, whenever you look at, or when I look at energetically, a woman's thought pattern versus a man's in general, this is not necessarily 100% across the board, but in general, women think in a web-like pattern. So when you think in a web-like pattern, you tend to have all of these, you see the joke, I have too many tabs open in my brain kind of thing. And that's why my processor's not working, and we do tend to do that as women. We tend to have too many things open in our mind at once, too many streams of energy trying to run at one time. And so it makes us feel very scattered. It makes us feel very frazzled and like we just can't get anything done. So there's a couple of tips that I've got that work really well. One of these actually comes courtesy of my husband for me that I've used over and over again. I've used with clients and in the book as well. In that is to close. I call it closing the boxes, and to visualize in your mind all of the things you have going on. Each thing is a box. Your children are a box. Their practice that you got to get them to is a box. Their school is a box. Fixing dinner is a box. Your job is a box. Everything is a box. And so you kind of envision that as everything is a container. And what I tell people to do is close all of the boxes. every single box in your mind. Just shut all the boxes. Stop looking at it. Stop thinking about it. Just shut them all. And what that does is it kind of contains that energy a little bit better, so it's not all running at once. And then once you do that, now I say, okay, now go in your mind, envision opening one box, just one. And then you go through that stream of consciousness for that particular item. And that helps us to kind of control the energy that's going on in our mind, in our life, help us to feel less overwhelmed. And it helps you to be a little bit more linear with what you're thinking. And if habitually you're going to start trying to open other boxes in your mind, but just say, no, I'm choosing to just deal with one thing. And you just do that one thing, and it's very helpful. Another thing that I tell people to do is to ground. That's another really big thing. Because whenever we are running around, whenever we are dealing with a lot of different things, energetically, what we tend to do is we want to run. We're doing it's either fight or flight, right? We get into that mode of like, well, I've got to hurry. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. But when we do that, we get frazzled. We stick our keys in the freezer. We forget our groceries in the car and all the ice cream melts. Things like that happen, right? We've all done it. But if you can ground yourself, it's very, very helpful to stay in a very calm state and get a lot more done. So it's very simple exercise of just imagining you have roots coming out of the bottom of your feet and going into the ground. That's step one. A lot of times that in itself is a really helpful thing for people. And then I just tell them, take a deep breath up through those roots into your body, and then breathe out the anxious energy. And just take a few moments for yourself and do that. And it really makes a big difference.
Yes, I could absolutely see that and feel that because I am a yoga instructor as well. And we used to do quite a bit of grounding. But the visual is so powerful in both the things that you touched on, Amanda, the boxes. I love that. What a great metaphor. It's really helpful to be in the step you're in. And that's what those boxes do, because you're right. When you have all those other programs running in the background, you're actually creating the static, as I call it, the stress, and you're putting it on yourself. But it's interesting that we, like yourself, have to bring that to our attention so that we understand we don't need to have all those boxes open at the same time, because we can only work on one thing at a time. So I love that. And the grounding is so significant, because what I say and what you're doing is that it creates space, and the space allows us to breathe. It pushes back the energy. I always refer to as static, because when things are static, they're electric and they're busy and you can't tune in. But when you do that grounding exercise, that is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. These are fantastic habits. So we all have to learn and practice. Definitely. Even those are beautiful. Thank you so much. So tips and I do agree with you with women, by the way. That is very interesting that we do have a web, because we're very curious. I'm not talking about the things that we have to do, but it's interesting. And I'll just segue into this a little bit, because it reminded me of what you said. If you send a man to a grocery store and he comes back and you ask him, how was it? Oh, fine. He's got the stuff. You send a woman to the grocery store, she comes back and she'll tell you that she met the neighbor and she talked to the checkout person, and you won't believe what happened in the parking lot, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Isn't it true? It's like the women, just our minds are more curious. You must have experienced that. Anyone who's married knows what I'm talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Isn't it true? So yeah, our minds are naturally more, I guess, curious or busy just because of the way we are. So we need to understand, that web and those boxes. Beautifully put. I love it. So tips to stop negative self-talk. Now, you have experienced, and I'm sure all of us have, the inner critic. Can you give us 3 tips to help us calm that negative self-talk or put it to bed?
Well, the first thing is really being aware of it, because a lot of people don't even really think of that as being negative towards themselves. But what I tell people is, every time you do that, it's kind of like bopping yourself on the head or slapping yourself on the hand, or, you're beating yourself up internally. And they think, well, it's just what I'm saying, but it really is what you're thinking too. It's what you're constantly feeding yourself. It's like you're feeding yourself toxic energy all the time, and you're constantly beating yourself up, and that eventually can turn into physical ailments. I see it most of the time manifest as autoimmune disease. A lot of times I find people that beat themselves up a lot, eventually their physical body will turn on itself, and they will start having autoimmune conditions. Not 100% of the time, but I do often see it. And so that's usually what is a kind of a wake-up call for people, that they've been doing that. Now, if you can catch it before then, that's perfect. But the first step is really awareness, understanding that you're doing it. And once you have that awareness, start shifting your thought process into a different place. Every time you catch yourself doing it, stop and say, I choose to look at this differently. If you're saying, wow, I was so stupid for doing that, just look at it and go, okay, well, why did I do that? Okay, I choose to release the feeling that I was stupid for that, or I wasn't smart for having that experience, and just choose to release that thought process and say, well, how would I do that different next time? Taking different action on those steps the next time around. But the biggest thing is just when you catch yourself, just in replacing that with a positive thought and a positive action, whatever that is, turning that around, using it as an opportunity and viewing it as an opportunity to shift your life versus just constantly staying in that loop of negativity. Because once you start to shift your fundamental thought process and your energy around what you're saying to yourself, everything else starts to shift.
Yes, absolutely. So the awareness for most of us is key to start, because so many of us
Yeah.
are walking around unconscious. We're not aware of all of this self-talk. We're not aware of the saying I am. We're not aware of. So this is all bringing it to the surface and understanding what you're actually thinking or what you're actually doing. And that is so powerful. And then shifting that. So again, a habit, getting away from those negative habits and shifting to something positive, and little by little. I love that. And I didn't realize that all that self talk, the inner critic, could actually lead to autoimmune. That's very interesting. I could certainly see
Yeah.
that happening, but because I do know individuals with a lot of autoimmune issues, and that's very interesting. I will have to make a note of that and tell them to give you a call for sure. The effects of emotional disruptions. Now, you say emotional disruptions start in the energy system and trickle down into the physical level. So, explain that. And have you seen this happen with your own clients?
I have seen this happen with my own clients. Um, the way this happens is it typically starts with some sort of trauma disruption. So in the book, I talk about traumatic imprints and verbal inhibitory imprints. So the idea is that when you have a trauma, or you have something verbal that's said to you, not necessarily negative, but it definitely imprints your thought process and your energy system. It's kind of like a stamp on your energy system. It's like plopping a rock in a river. When you plop a rock in a river, the water's not going to flow the same way in that river anymore. Even if you take the rock out, there's an indentation where the rock was, there's a change in the energy flow. So whenever you have a distortion in the energy system, it affects the thought process. It affects our patterns over time and how we think and things that occur in our life and how we perceive what's happening in our life at the time. So but it starts with this energetic disruption and this trauma. And so in the book, I talk about this process and why this happens, and then how the traumas are related to each other. Because when you have one trauma, what happens is a bucket forms, basically. And everything that occurred during that trauma gets put into that bucket, whether it was necessarily negative or not. So, for instance, if you had a car accident and you were wearing a specific colored shirt, or if certain colored car hit you, you may start having a visceral reaction to a blue car if a blue car hit you, or a certain song that was on the radio that you don't even realize why all of a sudden these things give you anxiety. But they do. And so then you start to think, oh, there's something wrong with me. Well, your energy system has just grouped those into a bucket of the trauma. And so in the book, I talk a lot about how that occurs and how those traumas actually form a web-like pattern and are connected together. And helping people understand that, I think, is really key to people just kind of having an acceptance for how the energetic disruption has affected them. And over time, that turns into emotional disruptions. It turns into belief systems and patterns. For instance, if you were abandoned when you were a child by one of your parents, then it sets up this stamp on your energy system that is of abandonment. And so over and over again, you will probably experience abandonment in your life and say, see, I knew that person was going to abandon me. You have this belief process that you're going to be abandoned over and over again. So dealing with that on an energetic level and starting to release the emotions related to that imprint in your energy system actually helps to heal those patterns.
Wow, fascinating. I do believe that this is the gift that the angels have come down and given you. It's just amazing. So you were just talking about trauma, and I read too that you say trauma can freeze us in time, and that's really profound. How does that show up? And just you may have touched on it briefly, but how does that work when you say it can freeze us in time?
Well, what I mean by that is whenever we have a trauma in our life, it actually, part of the trauma, whenever I'm talking about that trauma bucket, is whatever your emotional state was at the time, at whatever age you were, your thought process in that moment. If you had something happen when you were 3 years old, I have a story in the book about a boy named Sam, and he got jumped on by a dog when he was young. And when he was older, every time he would see a big dog, he would have this reaction of, and he would act like a small child, and his friends would tease him and they said, you're acting like a baby, stop acting like a baby, kind of thing. And it really upset him because he couldn't control his reaction. He didn't understand that part of that trauma actually froze his psyche in that moment. So whenever the event occurs or something similar scares him, he has that reaction. I mean, I think all of us have been in a conversation with someone and someone overreacts and you say, stop acting like a child. Well, in that moment, there was a trigger that caused them to act like a child. And so that's not an excuse for that person to act that way necessarily, but it's an understanding that that person can have, that they can actually go back and heal that, and they can follow kind of the trail of breadcrumbs back, the path back to understanding, yes, when I was young, I was abandoned or I was hurt in some way. And that part of me, that part of my inner child is still very hurt by that. It's still very damaged. And that needs to be addressed in order to heal going forward and change the patterns, and Sam ended up getting a big dog later on,
Oh, wow.
and yeah. So it's really interesting how healing that pattern, because he deeply wanted a pet, but he just couldn't get past that fear. But once that fear was addressed and those emotions were addressed, then it was much, much better for him.
Yes, totally. I could completely see that now and understand that verbiage that says freeze us in time, because there are so many people that have those experiences. So you also say, which is really interesting, that non-traumatic events can limit us as well. That's a really interesting statement. Tell us how that works.
Well, a lot of times, parents will say to children when they're young, they'll say something that's seemingly harmless, and it's not meant to be setting up any kind of pattern. But the example I use in the book is a girl that her dad used to say, no boy is good enough for my little girl. And what her dad was trying to say is, you're very, very special, and I highly value you, and you're amazing, and all of those things. But he was choosing to say it in a way that created a thought process for her that she was never going to find the right person, that no one was going to be good enough for her. So what that created was a lot of frustration for her. When she would get into relationships, she would either say, I need to change this person because he's not good enough for me. Or she would go in with this, they call it like a Superman complex, and say, oh, he's wonderful, he's this, he's that, and put him on a pedestal. And then when he started acting like a human, she would have this reaction of, I can't believe you're doing that or acting that way. And really, she had an unrealistic expectation in the relationship, but she didn't understand where the core of that came from. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something negative that's being reinforced and said. It's just something that sets up a belief system that doesn't support us moving forward in our life.
Really insightful. I love that. Excuse me. So, intentions and emotional release. So, I read that you say that you want to set intentions before starting an emotional release technique, which you say there are many of them. And maybe you can touch on why you have so many, but also more interestingly, why set an intention before you have an emotion or you use an emotional technique, release technique?
While it's not required, I do encourage people to do that because it really does kind of set up the energy system. It's kind of like having a little mini meeting with your energy system and your mind, your subconscious, the universe, all of those pieces beforehand, and saying, okay, this is why we're doing this. This is the intention for this energetic release technique. So that whenever you begin the technique, kind of everyone on the team is on board with why this is taking place and what the goal of the technique actually is. And I've found that when I do that for myself, when I started teaching clients to do this piece, it really greatly shifted their ability to have effectiveness with the techniques that I was teaching them.
That makes total sense. I could see that definitely because it puts you in the state of mind too that this is what you're going, this is a goal, like the intention and why you're moving forward with that. Yeah, setting intentions is for good for everyone, and of course women entrepreneurs especially because there's so much to deal with. The influence of color. Now, I love that you discuss how colors and emotions are related, especially in the chakras. So the 7 energy focal points in the body are the chakras, as you mentioned briefly at the beginning. So tell us how colors influence the way we feel.
Well, it's multifaceted, but one of the ways that color influences the way we feel is that every single chakra has a color in general. Everyone's energy system is like a thumbprint, no two are the same, but in general, each chakra has a color. This is indigo here. This tends to be white. The throat chakra is blue, the heart chakra is green or pink, just depending, and so forth and so on. So a lot of times whenever there's energy disturbances in those particular energy centers, there's a deficiency in the color. And in the book, I call it, I say color is an energy vitamin. Whenever that chakra is vibrant and full of color, we're going to feel much more balanced in that area. For instance, if our heart is depleted of green or pink, we may have heartache, or we may have trouble opening our heart to people. We may have a very closed perspective on different things. Empathy may be difficult, that kind of thing. And so whenever we add color back into our energy system, that's a way to really start to replenish and balance the energy that's needed in order to function correctly. Because the energy center, if that's not functioning correctly, then our emotions are impacted. Our physical health is eventually impacted from a result of that. So when I talk about color as well, different emotions correspond to different colors, and you can use different colors in relation to different emotions. For instance, if you have a lot of anger, one of the things I encourage people to do, since anger is a red hot color when you think of anger, I tell people breathe in blue. Imagine that there's a ball of blue light in front of you and breathe that in. And it's like pouring water on fire. It really does help to calm you down very, very quickly. So that's definitely one way to use it. And then wearing color. If you feel deficient in a color, if you're drawn to a specific color, it's probably one that you need to be taking in. For instance, I used to have red walls in my house all the time. Every time we would move, I'm like, either put up a red picture or have something red because I needed that color. And now that that chakra is more balanced inside of me, my root chakra, I don't need it as much. Very seldom do I need to experience that color. But for some people, it's a lifelong thing. If they're not understanding that deficiency and how to work on that, a lot of times people have a lifelong color of orange or red or purple or whatever it is. It's their favorite. And it really is fueling them to get that extra boost of that in their life.
Fascinating. Yes, I love that. The idea of breathing in a color. I would never have thought of that. And certainly, if you feel deficient in some different area, then wear something that, it gives you that, or have a painting or a picture. That's great help, great tips. So emotions and the physical body. How can we tell if we are storing emotions in our physical body? I think we may have touched on that a lot with the autoimmune. And why does this happen?
Well, as I said before, everything starts energetically. So it starts in an energetic place. You have an energetic disruption, you have a trauma, you have some kind of disturbance in your energy system that creates a disruption. And then that leads to emotions. And a lot of times we bury those emotions. A really good example of that is repressed anger. A lot of people have repressed anger. They don't even seem like angry people. They may actually seem like they're very meek. They're very shy people. A lot of those people have very high levels of repressed anger because they haven't felt the ability to express that in their life. And so our bodies tend to store different emotions in different places. For instance, the liver and gallbladder are places that people store anger a lot of times. And you can find that, reference in Chinese medicine. There's a lot of those kind of references. And I just took it a few steps further in the book as far as breaking it down more into emotional states and where these are stored. But what happens over time is you can actually start to develop ailments in those areas. A lot of times people who have repressed anger, they develop detoxification issues with their liver. Some people have really high levels of allergies, or if it goes further, they can have, liver, chronic liver problems. They can have gallbladder stones, and maybe even have to have their gallbladder out if they're having those issues. And we don't tend to correlate that directly with emotions, but for a while, I did just nutrition. I stepped away from the energy world and I said, I'm just going to do nutrition. That sounds more credible. And so that's what I did. And I went to school and all of that. And when I got into nutrition solely, what I realized is people that were having issues in the functional medicine world, that were coming to me, that were having all of these physical issues, had so many more underlying energetic and emotional issues that we had to address first, because I would see them and say, we can work on this. We can give you vitamins. But that's not going to fix the overall issue that you're having. You've got to address the physical once it shows up. I mean, you can't not, but also you've really got to address the underlying root of the emotion. It's kind of like addressing it with just medications or just vitamins or, physical things. It's like chopping the top off of a weed. It's just going to grow back,
Right.
So you've really got to address the underlying root there. And that's how, when physical emotions get stored in our body, or I'm sorry, when emotions get stored in our body, they do show up as physical ailments later on if they're not addressed. And sometimes we're not even aware we have them. But when you have a physical ailment show up, you can start drilling down and kind of asking yourself, what patterns do I have in my thought process? What patterns do I have in my emotions? What's my go-to emotion? Am I depressed a lot? Do I have a lot of anxiety? Bitterness? What are those emotions? And then you can kind of go from there.
So powerful. Excuse me. Oh my gosh, we could all use this. This is amazing information because you're right. It's addressing the whole, and now we're understanding what a lot of ancient medicine has known for years, is that if you do consider the body as an energy source, which I do and you do, obviously, and we've learned now with technology that it is, that there is so much more than just what appears to be ailing an individual. It could be everything, but it also too, because of the emotions that we carry that are energy sources, they can deplete us in certain areas. So so I understand then that you have a nutrition background plus the energy. Is that sort of what you alluded to there?
Yes, I did some online schooling for nutrition. Um, I learned a lot about naturopathic medicine, functional medicine, and although it's been a few years since I've done that, it does show up in readings a lot of times that I do with people. I'll tell them, I recommend a certain vitamin or that kind of thing. And I say, obviously it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. I have nothing on that, but I send them in the directions, and then they tend to follow that because it does help. You do need the physical because we're not just a one-dimensional being. We're multi-dimensional,
Right.
and we definitely have to address the physical as well. In addressing the physical, I know especially with yoga, with movement, I have a little bit of that in the book. It's not my background, but it does really heavily affect your emotional states as well. When you start addressing the body with movement, it's a huge, super powerful tool to really get energy moving in your body, and it can actually help clear emotional states as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, now here's something that we probably all need and all want to know: tips to start feeling happy now. You leave us with a few tips to start getting off the emotional roller coaster and to start feeling happy now. What could you give us as a great takeaway?
Well, the easiest thing I could say is one I say is one of my band-aid techniques is if you're having a moment where you're angry, you're anxious, whatever it is, you can just simply say, you set the intention and you say, I choose to release this emotion and whatever it's attached to. And you just envision it floating up out of your body and out of your space. You definitely want to set the intention to send it out a window, out a doorway. You want it out of your space because energetically you can pick that back up if you don't send it out of your space. So simply doing that and doing some deep breaths on top of it is very helpful in order to help move that energy out. And just doing that over and over again. And it's really important to address it in a respect of saying, and whatever it's attached to, because when you say that, like we talked about, all emotions are related together. Energy is related to each other. So whenever you say that, what you're doing is kind of pulling that weed up by the root, right? Anything that energy that you're feeling on the surface is attached to something. It's like, it's an iceberg. Put it on the top, there's a whole lot more underneath. So if you say whatever it's attached to, you're releasing all of that energy versus just the initial feeling, and you're digging deeper every single time you do that exercise.
Yes, I could definitely see that. And would encourage everyone just to, you'd make you feel lighter, if nothing else, for sure, just to get rid of that heavy weight. Amanda, is there any last words that you would like to share with our audience?
Taking care of your energy system is just as important as brushing your teeth, going for a walk, eating good food. It's definitely part of who you are as a being, and it requires you to keep that healthy and strong. So doing some exercises to be sure that you're constantly clearing out the emotional garbage and baggage that you're carrying around is really key, and it's going to expand your life tenfold if you do this on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was wonderful. And I have one last question for you, seeing as that we're here on the Epic Vision Zone. If your life were an epic story, what would the title be?
Wow. Um, that's a really good question.
Thank you.
You stumped me. I guess the
Take a
title would
breath.
be, yeah, take a breath. You too can have an amazing life.
Wonderful. That makes total sense. Absolutely. Miracles can happen, right?
That's right.
Wow.
Every day.
Every day. You're living proof that that can happen. So be sure to connect with Amanda. How can people connect with you? And I know we will have this information as well on your bio, but maybe just tell individuals how they can connect with you, and if there's anything that you would like to highlight that individuals can either grab on your website, or if you have something coming up.
Okay. My website is amandahainline.com. It's Hainline. And you can find me on Instagram at @akhainline. And also, I have a membership coming up that we're going to be releasing in the next couple of months. And the email address that you can email me at is info@amandahainline.com.
Wonderful. I'm just curious now, what is the membership?
The membership's going to be called the Feel Better membership. And in the membership, what we're going to do is we're going to give people the assessment that's found in chapter 3. And we're going to let them kind of journal their way through the book so they can see their progress. And there's going to be a video for each technique in the membership so that they can experience it in a different way, because some people do well with video versus audio or just print. So we wanted to give people multifaceted ways to digest the information.
Well, that sounds great. And everyone be sure to pick up Amanda's book, The Feel Better in 5 Minutes, an empowering guide to gain control over your emotions. And like I said, you will find all of Amanda's information and social media connections on her bio page. So be sure to go to her video on janeapplegath.com. And also be sure to follow me on Instagram at Jane Applegath, and check out how you can become an epic entrepreneur at janeapplegath.com. This is the Epic Vision Zone, transforming your dreams into epic success.